All right, it is the top of the hour, and we are going to go ahead and get started. My name is Nicole Lyons, and I appreciate and I'm so grateful to everyone that has joined us here today. I am here with my colleague, Colleen Sullivan, and we are part of the Jorgensen Learning Center. And our team of learning professionals is committed to supporting leaders to enhance the quality of their everyday leadership conversations, relationships, and results. We're using the Zoom webinar platform today. So those of you who are not familiar, there are a lot of ways that you can connect with us and engage with us during the session. You should see some tools across the bottom of your screen. One of those is the Q&A space. So feel free as you are joining us in the session today, if you hear something you want to hear more about, or if you have a question for us, feel free to use that Q&A feature and we will get back to you. There's also the chat function. So if you're familiar with that, you can click on the little chat button and go ahead and chat to us. Be mindful that there are a couple of ways to use that. You can chat to just the panelist, Colleen and I, or you can chat to the entire group. And sometimes those conversations that get going there in the chat, if you share with everyone, are wonderful ways to support additional learning and connection. So those are some ways that you can connect with us as we go along in our conversation today. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Colleen, who's going to kick us off.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you. And we are so grateful that you're taking time out of your busy day just to join us for a brief conversation about really how can we be very intentional and focused on developing professional relationships. One of the things, working with JLC, we really support individual leaders, teams, or organizations in being very intentional and developing quality professional relationships through their everyday leadership conversations. And so it can be a one-on-one, it can be one-on-many, it can be in the virtual environment, or for those of you who actually have the opportunity to go back to work. How can we really ensure that we are developing and intentionally developing those relationships so we can then produce the desired results? So today, Nicole and I are going to share just a couple of really easy to apply ways. Our hope is we can develop a common understanding of what those are, how you can apply those in your everyday leadership conversations that you're currently holding. So at the end of our brief time together, you can commit to taking one of these and applying them moving forward to really intentionally focus on enhancing those relationships. So I'm going to pause right there and just ensure that we're all on the same page. So I'm going to close the learning loop with my colleague, Nicole. Nicole, what are you hearing so far is really the focus and intention of our conversation this morning?
Yeah, what I'm hearing you say, Colleen, is that this is really about creating space for intentional conversation and being intentional about the relationships that we develop through those conversations, because those conversations are what is going to build those relationships, which will enable us to get to the results that we want.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I think many times, I've had clients over the years come and go, hey, Colleen, come and do some team building. And I'm like, okay, yes. And there's an opportunity to develop team, to develop really that space where you can have these candid conversations in every conversation that you hold.
Yeah.
One of the things that we share with our clients pretty consistently is the quality of the conversation and the quality of the professional relationships impacts your ability to produce results. So the quality of those relationships impacts your ability to produce results. So our invitation is, once again, just to kick back, take some notes, join us in those chat features, and really share some of those stories, some of those great things that you're currently doing, really to help enhance the quality of those professional relationships. And off we go. Nicole, I kick it over to you.
Thank you. So I wanted to take a moment first and just really recognize where we all are right now. And I found this visual and thought it was super apropos to what it is we are all collectively experiencing. And I think these kind of waves of things that have been coming over us makes this conversation right here all the more essential and important. And it makes each and every conversation that you have as leaders with your teams, with your individuals that you work with, with the people that you care for in your life, all that more important. Because I think we're all operating in a space of kind of that reactionary fight or flight mode. And I thought this was just a wonderful illustration of that. And then the other illustration, whoops, got away with my slides there. The other illustration that I felt like was such a great expression of where we are right now was this quote here. And if you can't read it, I hope you can all see it there. It just says, "My boss just called and said, 'How are you?' And I reflexively said, 'Fine.' And she was like, 'Nope, start over. I'm not fine. You're not fine. No one is fine. Let's have a real conversation.'" And I think that's really, if you take nothing else from this session today, I hope that you will take away the idea that it's never too late to start having real conversations. And it's okay to ask for a do-over. Sometimes we operate on autopilot and we just want to get into whatever it is we know we can accomplish because that's something we can control right now. And it's okay to just say, "Hey, wait a minute. None of that was authentic, and can we just start over?" So my invitation to you is to think about ways you can take what we're saying today and apply it in a way that can help you to be more authentic in those connections that you have with the people that you lead and the people that you care for.
Mhm. Yeah, and I like that, Nicole, also kind of having as a leader that self-awareness, right? Because even with that slide, it's like, okay, Nicole, how are you doing today? And you're just like, oh, everything's fine. When I can see that it's not. I mean, you did a beautiful job on Friday. We were having our team meeting, and my son just left and went away, drove back to San Diego, back to college. And literally Nicole saw me in our Zoom meeting, and I clearly was, shed a few tears. I was pretty sad that he was leaving. And you reached out to me via text. And I just wanted to say those simple steps mean so much, especially right now, because to your point, it is, how easy is it for me just to say, oh, nothing, and we move right along. And yet that was such a great opportunity and a great example of truly reaching out in an authentic way, because you saw something, you paused, and you reached out. And I think, to your point, and that's a great slide that illustrates that, and it's recognizing when that happens, and sometimes even just noticing that maybe people aren't being themselves, right? You had a good relationship with me, you have a great relationship, and it's noticing, well, Colleen's not herself today. So instead of pushing through that conversation, how can we pause? So I think that's a great example of how we can do that, just to ensure we're not just pushing through because we need to get through the meeting, because we need to make the numbers, because we need to roll forward. This is about, as you mentioned, a genuine, authentic conversation and connection.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is just such a great kind of story about how it's never an inopportune time to connect with someone. And sometimes you have to connect with someone before you can get to any of the other stuff anyway.
Absolutely.
How much is someone going to hear you when they're in a space of reacting to something that's going on in their life? And I know you're going to talk about that a little bit more as we go on with the session today. So I'll leave it at that for now. But wanted to talk a little bit more about these relationships and results and why it's so essential for people to focus in on the quality of those relationships. The quality of the conversations and relationships that you have real tangible results on the real tangible impact on the results that you are trying to achieve. It's the first of the year. We're all very concerned about our new numbers and our new goals and our new targets. And it can be compelling and seductive to try and, get people on board and into those. And sometimes we have to take a pause and really reflect and focus on what it is we're here for the people in these situations, how we can be more connected to the individuals, because the results will follow. As leaders, we do have a direct impact on employee satisfaction and motivation and productivity, those results we really want to achieve. And effective communication, which is all tied up in those relationships, has a huge impact on engagement and connection in the workplace. And research shows that leaders and managers are accountable for 70%. That's a huge amount of motivation for employees. We know from years and years of evidence, and Colleen, you and I know this from working directly with leaders and their teams, that employee engagement drives productivity. Like if you
Yeah.
want that true like discretionary effort and people to know what the company is all about and to be committed to it, to those goals that you're talking about, those relationships have to come first. And yet 85% of employees are not engaged in the workplace. That's a huge number of individuals who are disengaged in an environment. And these numbers are from 2020, but I'm guessing they're not reflecting the full impact of 2020. So I think there's a lot that leaders are being expected to deal with now. And I think that those things all come back to the relationships that we have with the individuals that we lead and care for.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at the biggest drivers of employee engagement, many of them, actually most of them, revolve around poor communication or really effective communication. And disengaged employees, they don't really understand how they fit into the culture, how they connect with the company goals, and that can lead to a lot of really unwanted problems. But quality conversations, they build trust. And I think we just gave you some examples in Colleen and I's exchange, how those quality conversations build trust. It shows people that you care. It builds empathy and clarity. And those are all key ingredients to a healthy and engaged work environment. So through good communication, employees become more engaged and more motivated. 3 in 4 employees see this. They understand, they say that effective communication is the #1 leadership attribute. I thought that was really compelling. And 1 in 3 employees feel like their leaders communicate effectively. So 3 out of 4 think it's the most important leadership trait, but only 1 in 3 think that their leader communicates effectively. And moreover, 71% of employees believe that their leaders do not spend enough time communicating with them. So those are huge numbers and huge ways that we as leaders can have impact on the people that we care for. And that leads to kind of this key point number 2, Colleen. When you put the relationship first, the results will follow. So what does that mean? And I think that's kind of the point of this conversation is, what does that really mean to put that relationship over results? It does not mean that you're besties with your employees. It does mean that in every interaction, as Colleen mentioned, you're intentional, whether it's a call, whether it's a text message, whether it's a formal or informal meeting, you're creating safe space for open communication, and you're setting a space where people can be themselves, where they can feel seen, where they can feel heard and feel cared for. And good leadership communication helps people to collaborate and learn better, and more effective communication puts everyone on the same page. And when people work together and communicate in this way and speak to each other respectfully, that's where you can accomplish things like those results more efficiently. And our conversational leadership practices really lend themselves to creating this kind of relationship and creating this kind of learning environment for you and your teams. We teach on the practices of creating focus at the beginning of a conversation, checking in like Colleen and I did at the beginning of this conversation so that everyone has an understanding of what the conversation is going to be about. Surfacing and clearing obstacles, and Colleen's going to tell us more about that, but really that's meeting people where they are, recognizing that there's so much going on that sometimes we need to get that out before we can really be focused in a conversation about work or the goals we're trying to accomplish. And then having space where each individual and the team can develop a collective and common understanding. You're closing the loop and acknowledging each person and responding respectfully, and then generating committed actions at the end. And we teach about those concepts and practices and protocols to individual teams, as Colleen mentioned earlier in the conversation. And we also have 2 dedicated webinars, sessions that you can join us for on building those meeting practices that'll be really effective in building relationships and engaged work environments. We also have a conversational leadership fundamentals session that gets into each one of these aspects and how you can implement them with your team. So we'll talk a little bit more about those too. But Colleen, I shared a lot of stuff there about leadership practices and why it's so important to focus in on the relationship and about how the relationship will drive those results. What did you hear me say and kind of what's landing on you about what I shared?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of information. I think I'm going back to the beginning of the conversation where you kind of laid out some of those statistics. And one of the statistics that really resonated with me was when you were talking about engagement and disengaged employees. And I think anytime that people do not feel connected and a part of something, a part of the meeting, a part of the team, a part of the effort, whatever that project happens to be, they don't feel like they're contributing to something, then they can begin to disengage. And that's one of the things of organizational health. When people don't see how they fit in and how their day-to-day efforts contribute, boy, do they start to become disenfranchised. And once I start to become disenfranchised, my language changes as well. My thinking changes in the language I use. And I think, especially right now in this virtual environment, it's so much easier for me just to lay back in the meeting, follow along with what it is you're saying, multitask when nobody's looking, right? And not really intentionally lean into the conversation, especially if no one's creating a space for me to contribute. And so once again, then in talking about results, right? If I don't feel like I understand how I fit in, if I don't feel that people appreciate my day-to-day efforts, now I'm doing an individual effort. So now I'm almost isolating myself and leaning back and going, good luck with that project, Nicole. I hope you get that, achieve results. I'm not offering my thinking in a meeting. I'm not offering my best efforts. Now, our team is now producing individual effort. And even though I might be over here kicking ass, right, and doing an incredible job, it is nothing compared to once we create that space that you mentioned. Now we have shared meaning. Now we have people that are contributing their thinking. When you're engaged, everyone on your team is focused on how do we help the team win? And I think that's the biggest piece, Nicole. So I love those statistics because everybody's been on a team when, they feel like, and I hear this with my kids, I'll go back to my son, right? He's going to Montana State. It's like, oh, mom, there's always somebody. We get put in these collaborative learning groups, especially on Zoom now. And, I've got somebody on my team and damn, they're not doing a thing. And so that's the other piece that I'll leave you with, Nicole, and then I'll close the loop with you as well, is, we always hear about your team is as strong as its weakest link. If you've got one person who's starting to disengage, I'll go back to see it and see something, say something, right? If you see that happening as a teammate, as a team leader, recognize it and then reach out and begin to re-engage that individual. So I'm going to pause, Nicole, and just kind of ask with you, kind of with what I've just offered to our friends out there. What are you thinking, and what are you learning so far in our chat?
It's making me think about how important the feedback loops are.
Yeah.
And the feedback is some of the research I was doing is showing that people can be just as engaged, if not more engaged, working in a virtual environment, but it hinges really tightly to the amount of feedback they're receiving. And being really intentional about creating those feedback loops is essential. So what if you could incorporate feedback into your everyday conversations versus making it about this separate one-on-one conversation or another meeting you might have maybe once a month or once a quarter? What if there was constant feedback? And even if the feedback is less than desirable, people still crave it and want it. Even if it's bad, even if it's bad news, people statistically show that they want feedback more than ever. So those constant ways that you can just build the feedback loop into these conversations, into your meetings that you already have, the more effective that communication building and more effective that level of engagement really is. So
Yeah. Excellent. So what I'm hearing you say is another way to enhance the quality of the professional relationship is through feedback loops.
yes.
And whether you're focused on things that are going well or enhancements, people crave that. So it really helps them connect. And I'll offer this just as an example, right? In some of your meetings that you're probably already holding, a great opportunity is to do what we call an after action review. So at the end of your meeting with your team, you can talk about not necessarily the content, right? Or the what it is you were talking about, but how did you facilitate the meeting? So a great way is to say, what are some of the things that we did in facilitating the meeting that went well? Notice the language, right? That went well. And then pivot to what are some of those things in the meetings that perhaps we might want to enhance or do differently? And notice, as Nicole mentioned, people crave feedback and they crave an opportunity to get better. But what I want to make sure that you're noticing is the language, because I work with executives and they go, all right, at the end of the meeting, what went well and what went bad, or what was wrong, and once again, our words create our reality. So the more we can use these types of words. So once again, that feedback and after action review that I encourage you to consider in some of your meetings is what went well. What are some things you might want to enhance or do differently in the facilitation of our meeting to ensure everyone's engaged? And then finally, what did we learn? What are we learning? And I think that's another really important thing to help people stay engaged is help them intentionally think about what are some of the things that they're working on personally or professionally to continue to strive to get better.
Yeah, we have
So I'm going to pause, Nicole. I'm looking at the time and I know we've got to pivot forward, but this is great. So I just wanted to see, do you have anything else to add to that piece around that feedback loops before we move on?
we got a really great comment from one of our attendees that said it's much easier to reach out for a possibly difficult conversation if you've already developed those relationships.
Absolutely.
So I think that is so key and essential. And even if it's a difficult conversation, what Colleen just mapped out for us is a great way to start even a really hard conversation when something went wrong. So what do you think went well? And then what might you do differently the next time? And what did you learn from this situation that could really help you moving forward into the future? So yeah, thank you so much for that comment. And I think that's just such a great point about how having these relationships will make all of your conversations much easier.
Yeah, absolutely. And it keeps you out of judgment. I think anytime people feel like, they're doing something wrong, they're bad, right? Or, you know, they're not enough, right? It creates that sense of almost just like they're just constantly slugging through and not really breaking through the other side. So you mentioned this earlier, Nicole, making people feel heard, making them feel connected to. I'm not saying I'm going to agree with every single thing you do. However, to our colleague's point who wrote in the chat is, if I have a quality relationship, quality professional relationship, when it comes time for me to say, well, geez, Nicole, I'm wondering from your perspective, what are some things perhaps you could do differently moving forward? When I offer my thinking, it's going to be land on her in a different way. She won't get up her conversational dukes, right? In a defensive posture. No, Colleen, I already did that. That didn't work, right? It perhaps will be open to consideration, right? Instead of just the close down, shut down mode, which I myself have seen many, many times. So
Yeah.
Excellent, Nicole. Thanks so much for that. I will pivot to, and you mentioned this earlier, just talking about, how can we, with so much noise and distractions, okay, how can we really help notice this and really help reduce obstacles to listening and to learning? And I wanted to kind of set this point up with just a brief story. I've had the pleasure of working with a Fortune 50 company off and on for many, many years. And I had a VP invite me down to Woodland Hills. And he wanted me to come and work with his team in the afternoon. And there was a team of about, 20 people, I think it was. So I went down there, and I started out just like we do. We always sit in a circle. And I started out with a focusing statement of why we're here, what it is we're going to be learning together, and what it is we'd like them to be able to do at the end. And I closed the loop on this by asking them to have a 30-second conversation with the person sitting next to them.
Hmm.
And oh my gosh, everybody started talking. I mean, it was like chitter chatter, chitter chatter. I couldn't pull them back, couldn't pull them back. Finally, I got the group back and I said, okay, I thought, wow, this is an engaged group. This is going to be awesome when they tell me what they heard me say. And you know what they said, Nicole? I called on a couple of pairs. I go, so what did you hear me say? What did it mean to you? They go, I didn't hear a thing you said, Colleen. I was so busy thinking about the announcement that just came out that we received that was talking about restructuring and how it's impacting our department. I was like, oh, okay. I mean, it was exactly an example
Mm.
of cognitive noise. And cognitive noise, it happens in our mind, right? It are things subconsciously and consciously that go on. And it can look like I'm sitting here in this, having this webinar, and the plumber is fixing my toilet and I'm expecting a package to be delivered. Or I drove into the office and I got cut off, or I'm worried about my son. So many things can happen that create this cognitive noise.
Yeah.
The reason why I'm bringing this forward, the reason why I brought my story and my example is they invited me there, right? And they wanted to hear some of the information we're sharing, just like I'm sharing with you today. But the point was, is so much was going on that it was an absolute distraction. So what I did, instead of pushing forward the conversation, I paused. All right, well, here we are. Let's talk about this. So I gave them a safe space to say, given the key, information, what did you hear? What did you learn about the restructuring? And what are you most focused on? So I created a space for them to share that information. Then I paused. Then we moved forward once they had an opportunity to process. Because once again, some of those things, our cognitive noise can take us sideways. And as I mentioned, recognize this is natural. There is no malicious intent, or we're bringing Colleen down here and we're not going to listen to a damn thing she says. They were there and focused. And so my invitation to you is you can feel it and see it in your conversations with people. And when you see that, don't punch through, right? Pushing through past that really, really will land on people differently and could potentially harm the quality professional relationship. So I'm going to pause and just say kind of what resonated with you with that story, and what are your thoughts as we talk about really the importance of being aware of cognitive noise, Nicole?
Yeah, absolutely. So that story is really such a wonderful example of how we structure our day as leaders. We go from one meeting to the next meeting to the next meeting to the next meeting. And sometimes in those meetings, we're getting some real information. You were working with leaders who received an announcement that's going to affect them and the people that they care for in a really tangible way. And they didn't have the space before you came into the room to process it, to really bring out their concerns about what was occurring. And even if you weren't going to solve anything in that moment, giving people the opportunity to reflect and recognize, process how it's going to affect them individually, puts them in a space where they can, or just recognize how much it's on their mind, gives them the opportunity to just say, here it is, here's what's distracting me. And that somehow lifts it off of us and gives us the space to be able to set it aside just for an hour, just for a moment, in order to be engaged in the next piece or next conversation. It reminds me of just how important that space is to reflect between different things that we engage in. And I'll share a further example. I don't know how many of you were recording this on January 12th of 2021, in case you watch it later, but I don't know how many of you were attempting to have meetings last Wednesday or last Thursday, where there were some major distractions happening in our country. And I know we were two people who were trying to have meetings last Thursday, and we were in a meeting, and Ray Jorgensen, our founder, took a big pause. Like, how are each of you? are you okay? And we were like, yeah, we're okay. And then he was like, no. Are you really okay? And then we got to share some of our reactions to what was happening.
Mhm.
And we spent a good portion of that business meeting talking about our reactions to what was happening and occurring in our world and how it was affecting us and what we were thinking about it. And that really gave us the space to then have a meaningful business conversation at the end of that. That put us, in a space where we could move forward. And I think that that is so important, especially right now. That visual keeps coming into my mind that I showed you on the slide of those two waves. Those two waves are constantly crashing over us right now. And if we don't give time to just pause and
Mhm.
just give space for people to recognize where they are, you're not going to solve it. You're not going to be able to give people a solution to what is occurring or what's happening, but you might be able to give them a little bit of space to feel a sense of relief so that they feel like when they're with you, they can be themselves and they don't have to hide anything and be this productive person all the time when the world is crashing over them.
Right.
And I think that gives just such powerful credence to the relationship that you have with your people that is going to yield the results that you need later.
Yeah, beautifully stated. And while you were speaking, Nicole, I just wanted to let you know we've got a couple of great comments in here, so I'll just read those. Sometimes we believe others are caught in the thick of things. However, if we open ourselves to others, what we see as thick may be very important to others. And he put suspending judgment.
Yeah.
And I couldn't agree more. I think that many times, all of us are kind of going through this. And I think it's important that we recognize it. And when we're leading, when we're in a conversation, and this could be, with our family members, and it could be in the professional setting, but just like we did with doing a quick check-in at the beginning of our conversation, as is creating space, not for the entire meeting, but for example, we could say, what most has your attention and why? Great check-in question. Let everyone on your team offer up their thinking. So there are so many distractions today. I know, Nicole, that we really want to stay focused on our webinar. So when a distraction you notice, right, you're being distracted from the conversation, how will you very purposefully and intentionally bring yourself back? It's having those types of 60-second conversations at the beginning of your meetings and helping people recognize that it's okay and that's normal. But also, how can we maybe surface those, clear those, so we can continue to move forward and get results? But as Nicole mentioned, if I am only focused on my results, it's the only thing I'm focused on, I'm missing out on the biggest piece, which are those quality, genuine, and authentic relationships that produce results. You can't just skip to the chase and think that you're going to be cashing in without really focused on these practical things that you can do to really produce this environment of safe space and trust. And so, Nicole, I realize that we are looking at some time here, and one quick thing before I kick it back over to you. I will say that, we're talking about safe space and trust, and we're talking about check-ins. And I know we've said some words perhaps on some people listening in aren't necessarily used to. I'll encourage you guys. We just began a podcast, and it is Everyday Leadership Conversations. And we have check-ins, check-outs, lots of these examples that we just kind of laid out for you pretty quickly. We go into detail in our podcasts, and you can get that on Apple. You can also get that on Spotify. So any place you look for something, listen to some of your podcasts, I encourage you just to try and find those, because some of these great examples that we gave, additional details in the podcasts. Nicole?
Yeah, thanks so much for that, Colleen, and sharing about the podcast. A lot of the topics that she mentioned and I mentioned, we'll be going into detail in, as she said, about in those podcast episodes. You'll see that I think there's 3 or 4 at this point in time out there that you can go, you can subscribe, you can listen to those. I think each one is about 20 minutes. So if you're commuting anywhere or popping out to the store or going for a walk, they're a great listen as you go about your day to help you build and enhance your everyday leadership conversations. So I think we're going to share a couple more things for you, opportunities to continue to learn with us. our kind of mission here is to really support you as leaders in your everyday conversations. And that's going to come in all different shapes and forms. We're committed to having forums like this where we can check in with you monthly, so that we have an opportunity to, let's see here, get my slides to pop back up. Opportunities to check in with you. We have that weekly podcast, as Colleen mentioned. I think new episodes drop every Friday. We also have this webinar, Everyday Leadership Conversations, monthly. We're going to have a new topic each month where I think next month we're going to be talking about coaching and how the importance of being a coach as leader, and also the importance of having a coach as a leader and what that can do to enhance your everyday leadership conversations. So we'll be talking about that next month. So I invite you all to join us. You can sign up now for multiple months. As I said, the topic is going to be different every month, and we just want that to be a space where we can be in learning with all of you as a community. And then additionally, we have opportunities for you to deepen and further your understanding in the conversational leadership practices. We have Meetings Matter, which is really about designing and facilitating effective meetings for sustainable success. And those, we're offering that every other month. I think it's the last week of every month. There's a different webinar. We also have one on conversational leadership fundamentals that really gets into how you can create that safe space of an environment of trust with your employees or the people that you care for. And then we also offer customized team learning sessions. So if you're interested in bringing conversations like this into your team environment, I invite you to reach out to us. We can find us and information about all of these elements at gojlc.com. On our events page is where you can sign up for any of the workshops or sessions or free webinars, and get those on your calendar now. And there's a contact form there on our website that you can fill out to get in touch with us directly. It's not a robot, it's us. We will respond to you. We will schedule a conversation with you to see how we might be able to support you and your team in developing the kind of relationships and the kind of environment that you want in order to build those relationships, those quality relationships and quality conversations that are going to lead to the results that you desire. So Colleen, I'll turn it back over to you to close us out.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And I think I'll just model a quick checkout. So one of the things that we always like to do when we talk about engagement is how can we keep everyone engaged from the beginning when we do our check-in all the way through to the end. And so I'll just do a quick one, Nicole. What was the best part of this conversation this morning for you and why? And when you're done, say you're out.
So Colleen, I just think the best part for me was hearing how much you appreciated the message that I sent to you. That, interaction, it was small for me. I noticed that something wasn't quite right or going on for you. And I just sent her a quick little note in our meeting. And I'm just so grateful that it resonated for you and deepened the relationship that we have as friends and also as colleagues. And just being able to express how important that is and the impact that can have in your work environments, I think is just really important. And having this space for you as leaders to be able to bring forward the idea of being authentic and how important these relationships are right now, probably more than ever, has been just really wonderful for me. So I thank you all for being here. And with that, I'm out.
Nice. I really think also the second piece is just that visual that you shared on the slide, the waves, because I feel like there were only two, but I feel like there's a ton and they just keep coming. And so anytime that you're feeling like a puddle or you're feeling that way, I think others around you are as well. So just recognizing it, seeing something in someone else and saying something and making those types of simple gestures makes a huge impact on developing these quality relationships. Once again, and I'm out. So once again, thank you so much for your time. We look forward to staying in conversation with you in the future, and have a great day.